Today, ladies and gentlemen, in the spirit of Halloween, I have put together a collection of interesting stories from the now defunct Spiritualist newspaper. The Spiritualist was a newspaper published from 1869 to 1882 and is packed with tales of supernatural phenomena and tips for communicating with the deceased. The belief in spiritualism and the practice of communication with the dead by way of medium saw growing mainstream popularity in the United States during the latter half of the 19th century. From there, it made its way across the pond to the UK. In London, the Spiritualist newspaper was created and publication began in 1869. In it, you'll find a true account of seances, ghost stories, inspirational spirit poetry, and apparitions of long-dead relatives. How to form spirit circles. Instructions for how to form a spirit circle to obtain manifestations adorns the last page of many issues of the Spiritualist, and here are a few things to keep in mind. Let the circle consist of 4, 5 or 6 individuals, about the same in number of each sex. Sit around an uncovered wooden table with all the palms of the hands in contact with its top surface. Before the sitting begins, place some pointed lead pencils and some sheets of clean writing paper on the table to write down any communication that may be obtained. People who do not like each other should not sit in the same circle, for such a want of harmony tends to prevent manifestations, except with well-developed physical mediums. It is not yet known why. Belief or unbelief has no influence on the manifestations, but an acrid feeling against them is a weakening influence. The first symptom of the invisible power at work is very often a feeling of cool wind gently sweeping over the hands. The first manifestation will probably be table tiltings or raps. Seances at Mrs. Everett's. Here the author describes a séance performed by a medium named Mrs. Everett from Pentonville, London, and the manner by which a circle of spirits appears and accompanies the circle of sitters. The controlling spirit comes, takes the medium by the hand, and the medium leaves her natural body and goes to her spirit home, where she is soon surrounded by her friends. Mrs. Everett knows that she has not finally left her natural body by the luminous blue life cord which goes from the back of her head to the back of her head of the natural body. She also saw the spirit circle formed a little above the one in the natural world, and the spirits collecting the emanations from the sitters, and surrounding the medium was the luminous and comparatively solid substance. She saw how the light spirits were produced, and how the spirit hands, arms, and faces were formed from this substance. From this material also the spirits formed a throat, mouth, and part of a face. And connected with this curious formation was a long tube coming from the medium. From the end of the tube issued a vapour, which was the breath of the medium, which the spirit used in connection with his extemporized apparatus to speak audibly in the natural world. Marvellous spiritual manifestations. In an article that recounts instances of solid objects carried from place to place and through walls of houses by spirits, one author describes a curious incident involving feathers. In the first number of the Spiritual News, there is a well-attested report of the bringing of a large quantity of fruit to 17 or 18 ladies and gentlemen by spirits. In number 3 of the same journal there is another well-attested case. The séance was held in the house of a Mr. Guppy, in a drawing room 24 feet long by 14 feet broad. 36 guests were present, and there being a large round table in the centre of the room. The room was completely filled by the company, the gas was extinguished and relit about 3 minutes later. In that interval, feathers fell perpendicularly and evenly like snow at all parts of the room, from wall to wall. The heads, shoulders and knees of the ladies and gentlemen present, and the table in the centre looked like a large circular cake of snow. The spirits had taken the feathers from a bed upstairs and brought them through the ceiling. Seances at the Spiritual Library. During one séance, a man named Mr. Burns interviews a spirit named TNCNT, a guardian spirit who speaks through the medium J.J. Morse. What is the difference between the soul, the spirit and the body? Asked the persons in the room. TNCNT said that the soul is the garment of the spirit, and the spirit cannot lose its soul, which is its outer consciousness. The persons in the room had each of them a physical organisation, and permeating the whole of it was a life principle, which continuously draws around it and spiritualises what it requires from the physical nature. At death, the physical body is no longer required, but the spiritualised particles within ascend upwards in a bright golden shower. A principle of elective affinity runs through these particles, so that each one goes to its proper place and a new body is formed. Finer and rarer than his hearers could comprehend, this body is the soul, and it is animated by the spirit. How far are you from the medium? Asked the persons in the room. TNCNT replies, I am 6 feet above the roof of the house in which you meet, and am acting upon the brain of the medium, who gives my thoughts clothed in his own words. Spiritualism. One author outlines some ways in which spiritualism alleviates the fears of death and eternal damnation for its practitioners. Spiritualism proves that the supposed dead still live and can communicate with us under scientific law. It also proves that those whom we loved on earth are separated from us, but only for a time, and in many cases think about us and watch over us still. It proves that the horrible doctrine of eternal punishment is simply not true, and it demonstrates that death is a natural and benevolent process and is but the gateway to the flower-laden land of the hereafter. Experienced spiritualists have altogether lost the unreasoning dread of bodily dissolution. The approach of death causes about the same amount of trouble to a spiritualist as the approaching extraction of a tooth. It may give temporary physical pain to be followed by greater happiness, supposing the life of the individual to have been at all a good one. The testimony of Mr. S. C. Hall. Here the editor of an art journal writes in it about his experience witnessing the apparition of his sister, who died of cancer 8 months prior. When she appeared to us in my drawing room, her face was so healthy, so full of the red and white that exhibit health, that at that moment I did not recognise her, for she had been 2 years confined to her bed with cancer prior to her death. Suddenly, I said with an exclamation, it is my sister. 3 blows were struck on the table, the eyes were closed, she had been blind during the last 10 years of her life. Possibly but for that, I should have recognised her. There was so marvellous a contrast between the face as I saw it then, so healthful, so beautiful, so happily smiling, but the likeness was exact, for I recognised every feature. A Yorkshire ghost story. I was seized with the most uncomfortable feeling, not exactly of fright, but a strange unearthly sensation that I was not alone. I had that feeling for some minutes when I saw at the foot of the bed a child, about 7 or 9 years old. The child seemed as if it were on the bed, and came gliding towards me as I lay. It was a figure of a little girl in her nightdress, a little girl with dark hair and a very white face. I tried to speak to her but could not. She came slowly up onto the top of the bed, and I then saw her face clearly. She seemed in great trouble. Unclasping her hands, she touched me on the shoulder. The hand felt icy cold, and while I strove to speak, she was gone. I felt more frightened after the child was gone than when she was here. Well, that is all from me, ladies and gentlemen. I would ask that if you found this video interesting, educational, or somewhere in between, then please consider subscribing and giving it a big thumbs up. And as always, take care and sweet dreams.